Hello, 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 hello. How you guys doing? So welcome back to another ZClassroom live session here. Hope you guys are doing well on this Friday. So hey Randy, hey Dark Knight. So are you guys tired? I'm tired. It's Friday. The quarantine stuff, it does definitely start to wear on you after a while. I'm definitely this week felt very exhausting for the entire week. I'm ready to sleep pretty much all day tomorrow and the next day and do nothing. So, all right. So, hope you guys are doing well and staying safe. So, this ZClassroom Live here, we're focusing on, for my sessions here, we're doing developer sessions for every day during the week. One of our developers will be streaming, and we've broken them down into different kinds of learning experiences. So my stuff is all focusing on like new users and kind of getting you into ZBrush. So I have the trial page here opened up. So if you guys want to experiment with ZBrush or have a friend that maybe is at home and looking for stuff to do, definitely send them a link to the trial. They can download it and try it out for 30 days. They can log into our streams here and follow along and maybe find a passion in digital sculpting. So with that, the trial itself will run on a Windows machine or a Macintosh machine. It's not going to run on an iPad. ZBrush also only works, really looks at just your CPU only, so it doesn't care about your graphics card. So if you have a friend that has a really old machine, but it doesn't have the greatest video card, it can probably still run ZBrush. So definitely you can download the trial and try it out and then follow along. For today's stream, I'm going to focus on ZModeler. So we'll go in some of the basics first, and then I'll show you some little tricks out of the gate with that. And then we'll go into modeling a tire. So let's get started here. So I'm just going to hop over to ZBrush. And as I mentioned at the start, I'm going to run this kind of like I've just downloaded the trial and now what I can do. So basically, if you launch the trial, this is what you're going to be greeted with. So you have this thing at the top here, and this is called Lightbox. And Lightbox can be opened and closed by clicking this button here or pressing comma on your keyboard. And Lightbox is going to allow you to come through and select a starting project for your scene. So what I recommend often if you're a new user is just coming and grabbing this Sphere 128 project, and as soon as you double click this, you'll go into 3D mode, your canvas will be set up correctly, you'll be given a material, and you can just go ahead and start sculpting. Now, oftentimes people get confused with this edit and draw mode option up top here, and so you can get out of edit mode, which is basically a 3D mode where you can rotate your model, and you're going to place just in draw mode, and draw mode will end up just being in this 2.5D canvas. And what this is, just think of it as like Photoshop. You have 2D and you can paint on the screen, and then ZBrush, when it was originally made, had 2D plus depth, and that depth is the 0.5, which is the Z buffer. So when you paint it on your screen, you could end up getting like layered effects. So that's how ZBrush started, and then the 3D aspect came in later. But the 2.5D stuff still exists in ZBrush, so if you're starting out fresh, I highly recommend, with this Lightbox open up, just coming through and double clicking a project like this, and this is going to load it in, and now you're going to be in here and you can start sculpting. So for today, we're going to come through and we're going to start looking at the ZModeler brush. So the ZModeler brush inside of ZBrush is ZBrush's kind of low polygon modeling tool set. So we can take an object that's basically relatively low faces, like if you think about no, not games nowadays, but games, a little while ago, they were made with really, really low polygons. So you can take models like that and then mold or sculpt with them very easily with this brush, change the forms, change the silhouettes, and design on the fly, and then you can convert them to higher resolution meshes. So after we have our sphere here, we're going to change our sphere into a cube. And the cube is pretty much like one of your standard shapes to start with the ZModeler brush. To do this, we can come over here to the tool palette, and then if we come all the way down to the initialize menu here, you'll see you have a few different options. So we have this Q cube, a Q sphere, and a Q grid. And these are going to allow you to get a quick primitive. It's going to take whatever model you have selected, as long as it's a poly mesh, and then if you hit this button here in this initialize menu, it's going to convert that model into one of these. So the go-to for just starting with the ZModeler brush is usually this Q cube option here, and if you click this, it's just going to generate a cube. Now these resolution sliders down here will determine how much resolution this cube has. So for navigation, if you click off and drag on the canvas, you're going to be able to rotate. And then if you hold down Alt, you're going to be able to pan. And then to zoom in and out, you can use this little zoom option here. Or you can do this little keyboard effect that I'm going to pull over my little keyboard here, because this one's a little tough one. And in my previous two streams, you can rewatch those too on YouTube. We replay all the streams, so you can go and log and watch those again. I cover more of the navigation stuff more in depth. So definitely, if you're just new to ZBrush and you want to learn more about the navigation things, watch those two first streams and I'll go more into the navigation stuff. But for now, you have the off and click will rotate, Alt and drag will pan, and then you can use the zoom option here, the zoom 3D to zoom in and out, or you can do this combination, which is you hold down Alt, you click on the canvas, you release Alt, and you'll see I'm still pressing down the mouse, and then drag, and that will zoom too. And this is called the Alt-click navigation. If you watch any Paul's streams, he'll do the right-click navigation for you. The Alt-click navigation was the pure ZBrush method, so it's the one that I always have been using since I started ZBrush, and the zooming in and out was probably the hardest thing for me to pick up. So definitely takes a little button pressing there, and so to do it again, hold down Alt, click off the model, release Alt, and then while you're still holding down the pen or the mouse, you can drag in and out. So these resolution options here in this initialize area are going to determine how many polygons your mesh has. So if you come over here and activate polyframes, you're going to be able to see the geometry of this mesh. So this is just basically displaying the topology of your model. And so I did this at 2, 2, and 2, so they have two divisions going top to bottom and left and right. If I change this to say 3, 3, 3, and then hit Q cube, you're now going to get a 3, 3, 3 cube. If you do say 4, 4, 4, you're going to get a 4. And you can even do like awkward amounts, and this is going to give you different shapes. So that is what these resolution sliders here are doing when you change them, and then if you press Q cube, it's going to give you a cube. Now over here you also have sphere, which will give you a sphere, and then you also have grid, which will give you basically a plane object. So this is all going to take the existing polymesh object you have selected, and it's going to convert it. So that object, that sphere I had originally that I loaded through Lightbox, is gone right now. So I could undo by hitting Control Z to get all the way back, but it's now turned into a cube, so that object is gone away. So just one thing there, when you use the initialize menu on a polymesh, it's going to take that and replace it with the Q cube, the Q sphere, or the Q grid. Now with this, let's see if I can move this somewhere where it's not going to be too crazy. I need to probably, here, I'll put it here. We'll do that for now. Oh my gosh, blowing up, blowing up. All right, so while I'm doing this, I'm going to try to, this is a live stream, so I'm going to attempt to answer questions here as this as well. So we are all at Pixologic are doing well so far. We're staying isolated, so that's good there. So we have a question, is using ZModeler and ZSpheres, you recommend we practice with a pen or doing with the mouse is okay? So oftentimes when I'm doing ZModeler stuff, I'll use a mouse. I usually have one there next. I usually have a Cintiq when I'm on my main machine, and then I have a mouse as well. So if I go to ZModeler, sometimes I use a mouse, sometimes it's just a Cintiq. It doesn't matter either way. Definitely if you're sculpting, you're gonna wanna use a pen or a tablet or a Cintiq display device that has touch sensitivity. That's going to be the way you want to go there. But with ZModeler, it doesn't really matter. Mouse works fine. And sometimes just if you're used to doing modeling software and say Max or Maya, you're used to the mouse anyway, so you're probably going to end up, your hands automatically go over there when you're going to start modeling. So before to start manipulating the geometry of this mesh using the ZModeler brush, I first need to select this brush, and this can be done by going to the brush palette over here. And if you click on this, you're going to see all the brushes that are loaded inside of ZBrush. Now, if you're new to ZBrush, this could be a little bit overwhelming because there's a lot in here, but you really don't need to go through all of these. The other thing with these brush system here is it has this built-in hotkey system. And the hotkey system works on a series of button presses based on names. So if I want to select the ZModeler brush, which starts with the letter Z, I'd first hit B on my keyboard, which would bring up the brush palette here. Get it up a little bit higher. And then I press Z, and this would isolate all the brushes that begin with the letter Z. And you can see the ZModeler brush is located right here, and it has the hotkey of M. So pressing M would be the final button press there of that 3-button combination. So if I want the ZModeler brush while I'm in ZBrush, the hotkeys are B, Z, and M, and then that would select the ZModeler brush. If I want to go back to, say, the standard brush, I can just hit the B button again, isolate by the letter S, and then after I have S selected, you can see standard is right here as the hotkey of T. And if I hit T, now I have the standard brush selected. So ZModeler, B, Z, M, standard brush, B, S, T. So you can learn those hotkeys. It's just basically the names of the brush, and then there's another third letter that comes into play. But they often are part of the letters of the word that the brush has. So the ZModeler brush, B, Z, M, Z for ZModeler, and then M for modeler. And so it just goes together, and now you have this brush. So now that we have this, the ZModeler brush is a context-sensitive brush. So what this means is if you hover over a poly or an edge or a point, you're going to see you're going to get different actions that are going to appear on your screen. So if I hover over this, it's saying move points by brush radius. If I hover over an edge, it's saying insert edge loop. And if I hover over a poly, it's saying Q mesh a poly. So what this allows you to do is you can come across your model, and if I use this Q mesh action on this face here, this will allow me to just come through and add geometry. So I'm just taking that face and basically extruding it out. Now the Q mesh action is a smart extrude. And so what this means is that it's going to perform a snap option as you do this action. So if I come across this poly down here and I click and drag, you're going to see as I'm dragging up, it's going to snap. And this is going to weld to that other piece of geometry, and then I can control the angle from that. Now I'm doing this with symmetry at the moment, so it's doing both sides across here, but you can see how that's snapping there. To activate or deactivate symmetry, you can just press X on your keyboard, or you can go to the transform palette up here, and there's the activate symmetry button here. And so this is controlled by the hotkey X on your keyboard, so you can toggle that on and off. Now with this, if I come and I have symmetry turned off, it's only going to do on one side of the mesh now, and so I can add this part here, and then I can keep growing this parts off. So this is just hovering over a poly. These are the default settings for the ZModeler brush, and as you do this, you can start generating these shapes, and you can just keep growing with this. So it's just going to keep, adding geometry to this. Now if I go the inverted direction, or going the opposite way, so instead of say generating outward or clicking the surface and dragging out, if you drag in, it's going to be able to perform a collapse. So if I want to punch a hole through here, I can drag, and then as it's the bottom there, it's going to remove it. So I can do the same process but backwards if I want to come in and start removing topology from my mesh. And this is all using the default action of this Q mesh here. So I can come through and now remove all these, and I'm going to get back to my cube. And then if I want to add some more, I say add this, maybe want to taper this side, add this up like that. And if I want to add this part there, I can do that. I can add them off like this angle too, and this is all just this Q mesh action. So you can get a lot of shapes generated using this process. Now I could come through and now remove these, or I can hit Control Z to go back to the original cube as well. So it's a very powerful process of going through and extruding faces, and it's a smart system there that will allow you to weld the parts when you extrude them. Now if I hover over an edge, this is going to be defaulted to insert an edge loop. And so this is pretty standard for any modeling packages. So if I come across an edge and click and drag, I'm going to get a loop. This is going to come through and add that. And so I can add topology to my mesh, really easy like this. And then this corresponds really well with that Q mesh action. So now I can come through and say, add some edges, and then Q mesh, and now I have different shapes. And then I can extrude these up, and you can just keep playing, with your shapes here until you get something that you like. And this is all just using those two actions now. So Q mesh, and then the insert edge loop option. Now the third option that is the default settings for the brush is the move. So if I come across a point and I click and drag, it's going to just perform a move. So just standard function here. The size of your brush radius is going to determine how many points you move at a time. So if I come up here to the draw size and increase this large and then click and drag, you see it's going to move multiple points. And then if it's really, really small, it's only going to move one. So those are the defaults for the ZModeler brush. So we have one question about extruding or doing this Q-mesh process, and is there a way to extrude or Q-mesh the faces straight out by the world axis rather than the polynormals? So it's always going to do it off the polynormals for this. You could extend it out, and then I can show you some ways you can align it, so it'll align it back to the axis. And you can do that with the clip brushes. But in general, when you perform the Q-mesh action, it's always looking at that surface face. So with the Q-mesh and the edge loop and the point, you may think, okay, well that's, that brush has 3 options, right? There's a little bit more. Some of these options have modifiers as well. So on the Q-mesh one, if you extrude the poly out and you hold down Control, you'll be able to break that face off. And this is going to allow you to pull it out, and now I have a floating island of geometry, and then I can Q-mesh that and generate a new kind of part. So you can do this and keep, dragging off, holding Control, pulling it out. I can drag this off, hold Control, pull it out, and now I have, floating topology on my mesh. And this will work with any shape as well. So if I do something like this and make something like that, I can Q-mesh this, hold Control, I get another little sliver there. Now, since this is a single-sided piece of geometry here, if I Q-mesh it again, it's going to seal it up and make it all nice and clean there. So you can use that process too to come through and pull things out and keep adding, different topology there as you work. Now, another option that was just holding down the Control key while you're performing the Q-mesh action there is if you perform the Q-mesh action and you hold down Shift, it's going to do a move. So now you can move the face you're selecting on. So come up here and hold Shift, it's going to move that way. Hold Shift, it's going to move that way. And so now I can do something like Q-mesh this out. Then I can Q-mesh, hold Control, which is going to split it off, add another one. Then maybe I want to say add an end loop in here. And then I want to do this and hold down Shift. And now I've generated that shape. So a whole bunch of different things you can do with just Q-mesh. And I haven't changed to any other settings in here, just using the default ones. Now, with the Q-mesh and the edge and the point, each of these different areas on your model have a menu that you can open up by pressing spacebar. There's a question in the chat asking if there's a way to keep the ZModeler menu open at all times. There is not. So you have to hover over the part you want to access the menu in, and then press spacebar on the keyboard, and this will open up the menu for that section. So if I hover over a poly and press spacebar, move this up so I got too many little dialogues popping up. This is the ZModeler Poly Action menu. If I hover over an edge and press spacebar, this is the ZModeler Edge Action menu. And then if I hover over a point and press spacebar, this is the ZModeler Point Action menu. Now, if I hover back over this poly one again, you'll see this is broken down into different areas here. And let me hide these slideshows here quick. It's taking up too much real estate. Precious screen space. So if I hover this and press spacebar, you can see it's broken into 3 or 4 sections in this one. So here we have our actions, and we can choose different actions here. And you can see there's a bunch of these. So there's bevel, there's bridge, there's creases, there's extruding, there's inflating, there's insetting, there's masking, there's moving. So a whole bunch of different things you can do just with the poly of a model. And I have the Q-mesh action selected, which is an extrude that has a weld option to it. So if you extrude out and there's a face next to it, it's going to attempt to weld to it. There's also the normal extrude, which is over here. And to activate any of these, you can just click on them and they will change into those different actions. Now, when you click on one of these, you're going to see that the options down below are changing. So each of these actions also have different modifiers that can be applied to them. And so we all have the same kind of targets. And then down here we have the modifiers. So the targets are going to allow you to select what area of the mesh you're deforming when you perform that action. So by default, Q-mesh is set to a single poly. So when I'm in ZBrush and I click on this poly here and drag, it's only going to perform that action to a single poly. Now if I go back in here and say change this to all polygons and now Q-mesh, you can see it's going to do this kind of scale effect because it's Q-meshing all the polygons and they're welding together. If I change my target to say flat island, what this is going to do now, it's going to look at the normal I'm clicking on and say, hey, this whole area here is flat and it's an island, and if I do now Q-mesh now, it's going to do the entire thing. So it's just going to do that entire area. So instead of doing that single poly now, it's now doing the flat island. If I come up here and click here, it's going to do this entire flat island. And so you can use these targets to your advantage to speed up processes. And so there's a whole bunch of different processes you can use. Ones that I usually use most of the time are usually a single poly, and then also I'll end up using the polygroup all or the polygroup island, and then the flat island as well. Those are usually my go-tos for using the targets here. Now below this we have a bunch of steps that you can actually go through for the QMesh action here, and then we have modifiers. And these modifiers are just going to change how this action processes. So if it's going to snap, if it's going to have a traction, if it's going to have a step size. So you have all different little things you can tailor to. So one example with the QMesh here, if I do QMesh, single poly, and step size, this is going to allow me to QMesh a poly, and then at a certain step it's going to add a line or add an edge. So if I click off here and drag, you can see I'm going to be able to draw it like that, and it's going to get that step size now and go bump, 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 all the way down. Now there are tons of these targets and their modifiers and their actions. And fortunately for you all, well, I don't know, maybe fortunately, I have, if you go to the ZClassroom area here, and if you just do a search, so this is Pixologic ZClassroom's website here, and if you do a search for ZModeler, each one of these has its own videos. So there's basically a video on every function that's in the ZModeler brush. So if you want to see what the edge close action does, there's a video for it. If you want to see what curve delete does, there's a video for it. Point bridge, point do nothing. So there's a ton of these. So if you have come across any of them and you're like, hey, what does this one do? There's a video for it. Now I think I say the word actually quite a bit in some of these, so I apologize that for ahead of time. I've burned it out of my speech patterns since then, but I do believe there's a lot of that word thrown around in these videos, so I apologize for that. But these will give you, pretty much all the information you need on any of those ZModeler things, and it will go through the modifiers and show how it works and what it does for those. So these are anywhere from like 2 minutes to 3 minutes, and they cover pretty much all of them through there. So that is that for how to get some more information on the stuff I'm showing today. Let me see if there's any more questions here. So we have one question about using the low poly model and then using the Boolean operation without changing the model. So there is a process you can use with a deformer that will go through and you can union your parts, which is basically use the live Boolean system to weld everything together. And that can be done through a deformer, and that lives in the, this is high level stuff. In the move palette, if you click this little customize gear here, and then in here there is a remesh by union, and this is going to use the Boolean process, but you can use it on a single subtool. Now it's not going to apply any extraction functionality to your mesh or subtraction functionality to your mesh. So it's only going to take your model and pretty much use the Boolean to take any of that intersecting geometry and weld it together. But you should be able to use it on low poly meshes. It may not give you the triangulation you want, because if it's really low, when those points intersect, anywhere where parts intersect with the live Boolean, it's going to generate triangles at that area. So if you have a really long quad that's like from here to here to here, and you intersect it in the middle, it's going to give you triangles in through there. But you can use the deformer for that. So that's just switch to move, scale, or rotate. When this Gizmo 3D pops up, click customize, and then in here there's a remesh by union. I think there's some Ask ZBrush videos on that as well. So Dougie is saying, should you set a brush size to a certain size to make most actions easier to work with? And should brush dynamic draw be on and off? So you're always going to want dynamic on when you're using the ZModeler brush. I believe it warns you if you have it turned off. So if I come here and turn that off, no, actually it doesn't. Well, I think it used to. But pretty much you want to keep your, it should, oh, there we go. Yeah. So you won't be able to really use the ZModeler brush if you don't have dynamic on. So definitely keep dynamic on with that. It doesn't really like it if it is off. Now my brush size is massive. And then if you have a larger brush size and you're using the QMesh, it's going to change how much snapping kind of happens between the things. So if you find that the snapping's happening too fast for you when it comes to another mesh, just change your draw size, and that will determine how fast that snapping process happens. And that's going to be only pretty much with using any of the QMesh actions on your model. All right, so we've gone through some of the QMesh processes here. And these are all gonna, if you need more information on these, definitely hit up the ZClassroom site, just do a search for ZModeler, and there's gonna be a video on all of these. So the next one, if we hover over an edge, this is going to give our edge action menu. And in here, we're going to have a bunch of different ones here as well. So some of the go-tos in here that I use a lot is we have like a collapsing one. There's a crease, which we're going to talk a bit about here. You also have the insert. And then you can have other ones too, like mask. You can slide, you can spin, you can split, you can scale. You can Q-mesh too and transpose and do some other things. But the main ones I go to are like the insert and then the crease. They're the ones you're going to see when we start going through the tire. These are the two I'm going to use quite a bit in that menu there. Now with the edge action of the insert here, you can see the target set to single loop. So what this means, if I come across my model here and click and drag, I'm going to add an edge loop. If I hold down Alt and come across an edge loop and then click, this is going to remove that edge loop. So this is what the single action is going to do. So I can come across, hold Alt and remove, click and drag, it'll add, and this will allow me just add edges on the fly like so. Now there's another option that you can switch to with the insert here for the edge loop. So if I come across and remove that, hover over an edge again, press spacebar, go in the ZModeler edge action menu. Down here at the target, we have multiple edge loops. Now when you open this, you're going to get a bunch more different options. So one of these is interactive resolution, and this is going to allow you to take basically and add multiple edge loops across an edge. So if I come across here and I click and drag, you'll see the first edge that's going to get added here, if you just click and hold, is going to be right down the middle of that thing. So if you need to add an edge loop directly in the center of two edges, use the target of, or not, yeah, I guess it is the target. Use the target of multiple edge loops and turn on interactive resolution. And then when you click, the first click will be right in the middle. I'm still holding my pen or your mouse here, and if you scroll up and down, this will now add more geometry or more edges to that area. So you can see I can add a whole bunch of edges in here or a whole little. Now you see when this is happening, I'm getting these different polygrouping, which is coming through here. And this different polygrouping isn't target, a modifier you can turn off for that target. So if you don't want that polygrouping to happen, you can definitely disable it. But this is nice sometimes if you add these, because you can see it's going to give you a different polygroup through each of these areas. And now that I've done this, if I go to this Q-mesh poly again, and hold spacebar and go back in the poly action menu, down here in that target, I can now change this to polygroup all. And when it's set to polygroup all, since this is the same color here, here, and here, if you drag this out, now it's going to be able to do that. So changing the target there, and that's one thing with that insert multiple edge loops. If you want to disable that, you can come down here and you can change to keep polygroup or same polygroup, and then when you perform that, it's only going to do one polygroup there. But that's the insert multiple edge loop. Now in addition to this, there's another one that's fun to play with, and that is the interactive elevation. And this will allow you to say add, an indent or an outdent, outdent, I'm making new words, along your surface. And for the tire, we'll end up using this some too, because it adds, a nice beveled ridge you can get on certain things. So if I come across this edge here and click and drag, you can see I can add by going up and down with my mouse or my pen. But then if I go horizontally, I'm going to get elevation. And so this is going to allow me to go in or out as I do this. And then I can control how many divisions by scrolling up or down, going in, it's going up and down. And so this way you can come through and add multiple edge loops and then also add a taper or a bevel to those. So another fun one there with insert multiple edges. Now the next one I want to hit on really quick is the crease option. And this one we're going to use quite a bit because when you're working with the ZModeler brush, basically when you're working with it, you're working at this low polygonal level. So this is what the object is. But oftentimes when you're working with this, you want to see it in its high resolution form. And this can be previewed. So if I say go to geometry here and I go to the dynamic subdivision area here, there's a button that says dynamic. And what dynamic is going to do, it's going to take this low resolution model I have and it's going to do this preview of what it would look like if it was divided up. So in the geometry palette, you can divide a model to have it increase its polygon count by clicking here. And so if I took this cube and divided, you can see this is what I'm going to get out of this mesh. But instead of making that change to your model, you can preview it ahead of time with this dynamic mode. And if you turn this on, it's going to preview what that model is going to look like smooth. And so down here you have a smooth subdivision level slider here, and you can actually turn this up or down, and this is going to allow you to preview that model with more subdivisions. Now this model isn't this tessellated, it's just a preview. So if you hover over it, you can see that it's basically working on like this cage or the low res version of it basically. So if you hover over this, you can still see that it's just these simple polygons that were on that low resolution model. So if I come across here and click and drag, I'm just gonna add one cube here to the entire mesh. If I turn off dynamic, you can see this is what I did. So you're just manipulating the low res one, but you're seeing it in its high resolution form. So this one's fun to use with the ZModeler brush because you can preview what you're doing at a higher resolution without really dividing your model up. Now, when you do this process, there is a thing that's called creasing that can come into play. And creasing will allow you to come through and create edges that are hard on your mesh. So right now, there's no creasing on this model, so when you divide it, it's smoothing everything. And so I'm getting this kind of smooth form. So this is great if you're making like a stuffed animal, but if you want to make something that's more hard surface or more organic, hard surface like a vehicle or something like that, you want to have some harsh edges in it. And to get those harsh edges, we can say, hey, for this edge here, keep this harsh. Don't make it mushy and don't smooth it down. So to control this, let me just go back here and turn this off and get back to my thing here. And we're just going to Q mesh these two polys. So I'm going to take this one, do single poly, add that out, and then I'm going to just put the next one there. And then I'm going to activate dynamic. And so this is the result I'm getting here. And now what I want to do is I want to add some creasing. So I want to find that edge that's on the top here, this one right here, and I'm going to hold spacebar to go in that ZModeler Edge action menu. I'm going to select crease, and I'm going to set my target to edge. And now I'm going to come across that edge there. You can see it's highlighted, and if I click, that's going to apply a crease. And you can see what it did there is it creased that edge, and now it's holding it. And these little areas right here are going to represent what your low resolution version looks like. So this is the point that's on the low one, and it's taken that edge and creased it. Now this doesn't look like all that great yet, but let's go and add a crease to the other side too. So I'm gonna come over here, let me rotate around here. I'm gonna add a crease right there. And now I've got those both edges creased, and you see now I've got this. So it's coming through and it's now taking that edge and making it hard. Now the rest of the model isn't creased, so this is still nice and smooth. But let's say I want to come in and add, this edge here to be creased. Oops. Maybe this one here, and then maybe this one here. And if I just go around here, if you turn on symmetry, this is a lot faster too, rather than going one by one. And you can see adding creasing, I'm now changing my design. So now I'm coming through, oops, wrong one. And sometimes it may be a little bit hard to select the edge when it's in this form too, so you can always come over here and disable this dynamic mode. You can also just press Shift D on your keyboard, which will get out of dynamic, and D will get back in it. So you can press Shift D to get out, turn it off, and then D to turn it back on. And so you can quickly toggle out, hit the crease on that edge. You'll see that the edge is going to be updated with this double line when it's creased. And then when you turn it back on, you can see now I have this. So now I've got this shape happening in my model. So I went to those edges, said, hey, keep those edges harsh, and now it's going to give me this creased effect. Now this once again is, just a preview here. So if I get out, this is what my true shape looks like, and I'm just previewing it with dynamic. Now there's also some ways you can globally apply creasing to a model too, so you don't have to go in and individually hit every single edge to apply that crease, because that could take some time. So you have some different targets down here like edge loop complete, edge loop partial, and you can select these targets and then apply the edge in that whole area. So if I wanted to crease this entire edge, I could use the edge loop complete and it would apply the crease all the way around. You can also go to the tool palette over here and go to the geometry area and then go to crease. And in here you have some automated buttons you can click. So the first one here is we have a crease tolerance. And this is going to say, hey, if the edges fall into this tolerance range of angle, crease that edge. So what I like to do is always set this to say 45 and then click crease. It's going to analyze the model, and now any edge that is nice and sharp at that 45-degree angle, it's going to apply a crease. So with my shape here, it's gone through and applied a crease pretty much everywhere. But now that I have this entire mesh creased, I can now go and uncrease edges. So I can come across this one here, hold down Alt and click and uncrease these. And now I'm doing kind of like the opposite. So now I'm getting this different look. So I've creased everything harsh, and now I've gone in, and now I've uncreased, and now I'm creating this shape. This is all still that low version, so I could come in and still keep editing with the ZModeler brush. I can come through and say remove these parts too. Say I don't like that, I want something more like that. And you can play with all these shapes as you're working on it. Now you'll see when I remove these shapes here, those creases went away that was on the edges because I basically removed the edge from that surface. So I can reapply the creasing by coming and clicking on those edges to get it back. I could come over here again and run that crease tolerance again, and then come back through and remove these edges too, and get back to something like that. You also have some other options you can use in crease. You can uncrease everything, so I can do that and get it back to there. You can crease by these polygroups, which are these colorings that is on the models that we haven't talked about yet today. And you can also crease all. So you have a bunch of different ways you can kind of come through and crease your meshes, and then these are all going to play really well with the dynamic. But crease 45 is usually where I go, so I'll uncrease everything, then crease 45, and then you just use crease to remove some stuff. All right, let's check these questions here. So one question about connecting two surfaces that are in symmetry using QMesh. So you should be able to do that as long as there are the same subtool. So here with this model here, I'm just going to take this part. Let's get out of dynamic here. So Shift D, toggle out of dynamic. And I'm going to give my whole model here another polygroup, so I have two different things here. So polygrouping in your meshes, we'll talk about this, and then I'm going to go to the QMesh for the symmetry. So on your meshes here, you can see I have these different colorings, and these are polygroups. So it's basically like selection sets, kind of, if you've used other 3D packages. And you can come through and set these, and these are going to allow you to kind of isolate your model at these different points. So if I just want to see this part here, I can hold down Control and Shift, which is going to give me the select rectangle brush. And if I click a vertice in this area, it's just going to isolate everything with that same polygroup coloring. Now, when you hold Control and Shift and click on a point, ZBrush doesn't always know which polygroup to select. So if I click on this point here, this point borders this polygroup and this polygroup. So when I click on it, it's going to isolate and give me both of those. So if you have low polygon geometry like this and you're trying to isolate just one polygroup, you may come to a point, and when you click on it, say like, I really want this one here, but if you click on this, it's going to give you both of them. So you may need to, if you add more edges in here with say that insert single edge loop here and give it a point of reference now. Now if you click on this, it's not going to be bordered, that vertice isn't bordered by another polygroup, so now we'll just isolate that part. So basically the polygroups allow you to isolate different sections of your model. They also can be used with any of the actions in the ZModeler brush that have these polygroup options over here. They can also be used to apply creasing, as we saw earlier in the geometry area and the crease panel. So there's a lot of things you can use with this to speed up your processes when you're inside of ZBrush. Now with this, you can clear them out. So oftentimes when you're using the ZModeler brush, a lot of the options will add new polygroups when you create new topology. So if I QMesh an option out, it may add a new polygroup. Now you can change that with those modifiers that are in that action, but you can also, maybe you want that, so you can go back to it and isolate that section out you just created. If you want to clear all your polygroups, the simple way to do that is go to the Tool Polygroups area and then click this Auto Groups button. And this will go through and it's going to look at geometry islands and then give you a new polygroup for every geometry island. You can also just press Control+W on your keyboard, and this is going to run this hotkey for the button right here that's called Group Masked Clear Masked. And this is going to come through, and if there's anything that is masked on your model, it's going to give a new polygroup to that. But if you have nothing masked on your model, it's going to give one polygroup to everything. So it's handy when using the ZModeler brush to come through and quickly just change your polygroup coloring. So now my mesh is entirely one polygroup. So the polygroup functionality is going to come into play a lot when you do these different actions with the ZModeler brush. Now another thing, getting into polygroups, is the ZModeler brush has a temporary polygroup that you can apply. And this temporary polygroup is going to overwrite the action, or overwrite the target that you have selected. So it's going to apply the action to the target that you have selected and also to any areas that have this white polygroup. Now to get the white polygroup, you just need to hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, and if you come across a poly and click, it's going to give you this white polygroup. So now when you perform, say, a QMesh action right here, and if I have this set to a single poly, it's going to perform the QMesh on that single poly, but it's also going to perform that QMesh on any poly that has that white polygroup. So it's going to do anything that's in white in addition to the target you currently have selected. So if I Q mesh this poly here, you're going to see that those white polygroups are going to go too. Now if I clear my polygroups by hitting Control W and I do the Q mesh action normally, you see only this one's going. But if I come over here and hold Alt and tag some polygons like this, now if I Q mesh over here, you're going to see that it's going to go with it. So there's this temporary polygroup that you can use, and you can assign this anywhere on your mesh, and this is going to allow you to use that action on that area and also to your current target. And the targets are accessed by coming across the poly, holding down spacebar, and in here you have your actions at the top, and then these are your targets here. So if I do something like flat island, it's going to apply to this whole area. So you can see it's going to give me a little crazy. Let's do Control W on this. Let's do it up here. So in Q mesh this, it's going to do that entire flat island. So if I click here, it's going to look at this entire flat island. And then if I want to affect this area too, hold down Alt, assign a temporary polygroup there. Flat island's going to process up here, and it's also going to process on that temporary polygroup. So now we're going to get to the question about the two surfaces that are in symmetry using Q mesh. So I'm just going to take my model here, and I'm just going to pull off a face. So to pull off a face again, just have the Q mesh action or the extrude action. I'm going to tag temporary polygroups right through here. So I'm just grabbing these. Perform that Q mesh. You can see it's going to take that entire area. And I'm going to hold down Control, and it's going to separate that off. So now I have this as a new piece of geometry. I'm going to tag those again, apply that Q mesh action. Now I have those two parts. Now with these parts, I'm going to grow this up a little bit, maybe add a edge loop in here, and then bring them out like so. So the question was asking about, can I connect two surfaces that are in symmetry? So if you do this, you're going to be able to connect them like that. And so you can actually continue working like this. If I want to add these, I can bring them up, add another edge loop, drag these across, oops, drag these out, and you connect them like that. So you can definitely connect parts. You just need to make sure that all your pieces are in the same subtool when you do this. So if I had this in multiple subtools, I wouldn't be able to connect this part over here to that other one if they're a separate subtool. So it needs to be in the same subtool there, but you can just do that and it will come through and connect. Now there are some processes inside of ZBrush if you're doing, say, with the Q mesh action, if you're doing stuff like deleting edges or things like that, it may come through and do a double polygon on it. So just be careful if you're doing bridging and symmetry while using the ZModeler brush. If you go across that middle line, it may end up doing a double bridge and you may have faces on top of each other. But Q mesh is going to take care of that. So the Q mesh action is going to apply a fuse. So if you come across a poly and you click and drag, it's going to extrude, and then it's also going to fuse when you do this. So it's an extrusion with a fusion, basically. So it's a Q mesh action is what we call it. Now there's also an extrude if you don't want the parts to weld, and this if you hover over poly and press spacebar. In here we have the Q mesh, which is the one that's going to do the extrusion and the snapping or the fusing. And then we also have just the normal extrude, and this one isn't going to fuse. So if you came through and started dividing these up, and if I activate like this, and then say added these through here, you see it didn't fuse those parts. So it's not going to do the smart weld. So there's times when you want to use just a normal extrude, and there may be times when you want to use the Q mesh extrude. So you have two different options there, and to switch those, just hover over poly, press spacebar. At the action menu at the top here, you can select, say, Q mesh or extrude, and then you can use either one of those anytime you want. Checking these questions here. So we have a question about filling a solid subtool with lattice structures. So there's nothing inside of ZBrush that will allow you to fill the entire structure with a lattice, but you can, say, take a face and then inset it and generate basically a little lattice shape from it. So if I say take my cube here, let's undo this back. Actually, we'll just go over to the tool palette, go down to the initialize menu here and click Q cube to just reset it there. Now for this, I'm going to hover over one of these polys here, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to locate the inset action here, and I'm going to do Inset Region. And what this is going to do, it's going to look at the region, and as I click this, it's going to inset that area. So it's going to come through and do that. Now there's some inset options down here. So you have border only and center only. So if I come through and hold down Alt and generate a white polygroup across this, click that inset, see it's going to allow me to inset that entire shape there. And then if I hold down, if I turn border only on, it's going to now just give me the border. So now I'm seeing through that mesh there. So if you want to create like a lattice structure, basically you can do inset, you can do a single poly, we'll change this to all polygons. Then we can do inset each poly, border only. And now if we come through and grab one of the polys here and click and drag, you'll see it's going to give me this shape. So now it's gone through and it's insetting all the ones. If I just wanted the centers, I could also just change my modifier to center only and click and drag, and that's just going to give me centers. But I'm going to want it with the border only. And so now I can have the border only. And then now I can go through and I can give this entire thing thickness. So to do this, I can hover over one of these polys here, press spacebar, and here I'm going to choose that Q mesh action. I'm going to change my target to all polygons and keep everything else standard. And now if I come across this and click and drag, it's now going to extrude that out, and now it's going to give me thickness in that shape there. So you can definitely do this to kind of create a lattice structure, and it's going to look at whatever the topology of your model is when it does this. So if your topology of your model is all triangles and you do that inset as every single one of those triangles is going to be insetted, and then you get triangle shapes. Since this one was all quads here, when I did it, I'm getting all quads. But that's definitely one way you can go through and make lattice shapes. However, you won't be able to get like a flooded lattice out of this process. So you're not going to get any internal geometry. It's just looking at the shell of the object and then performing the inset and then the extrude. So little thing there. So Dafu, yes, the Q mesh will fuse the verts if you're using that one, and extrude will not. So those are your two options there. So the Chris is asking, what's the difference between initialize and grabbing your shape from the gizmo? So we've been using the initialize here. This is just what I go to. So it's in the tool palette. It's going to take the object and I can convert it to a Q cube, a Q sphere, a Q grid. Now, if you're in the Gizmo 3D option and you click this little customize option here, there's a bunch of primitives up here you can select too. These you can select and then you can deform them on the fly. There's no right or wrong in terms of usage here. I just end up using the initialize tab. But definitely there's some primitives here, and this will do that same kind of process where it's going to take this and then append that shape in. When you append this in, it's going to have some modifiers here, and you can play with these cones and change your divisions, change your divides here, and then when you're happy with it, you can go to gear and or just go back to draw mode here, and you're good to go. So another option there. There's no right or wrong to use the Gizmo 3D customize primitive types up here. You could even just use the tools as well. So there's a bunch of primitive 3D objects here, but I just usually end up using this initialize Q mesh. So Gabrielle's asking, would it possibly make adjacent polygons into one? I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. If you can explain a little better, I can try to answer it for you. You can definitely weld polygons together if that's what you're asking. So if say you have this, and I want to collapse an edge. So this was the other one we were talking about earlier with the edge action menu, and here we have collapse. And so you have edge, hole, and polyloop. The edge one is going to basically take the edge, and then if you move your mouse in one direction, it's going to collapse one way. If you move it the other way, it's going to collapse the other way. So you can do something like that, and then I can come through and say insert another edge here, and then I come up through and collapse. Now I got a triangle there, right? And so now if I do that Q mesh or the inset, all polygons border only, see now I'm going to get that shape. And then I come through and Q mesh everything, and now you've got that result. So definitely you can modify the topology in that way and then change it. All right, so that was that. We got another question about vaulted roof in the cathedral. Let me just look at this image. If it's too chaotic, we're not going to go down there, but I'm going to take a look at it. We'll see where it opens. So this better be a safe image. Yeah, so for this one, what I probably end up doing is, so I'd model your shapes and make each of these little star patterns basically your geometry, right? So you have, this is a point, this is a point, this is a point, this is a point. and then all these are points. And then so this would be, as long as your geometry when you're doing this is keeping it at a quad, which is 4 vertices, or a triangle, you're going to be okay. You're not going to be able to do n-gons, right? So you can't do 5-sided kind of things inside of ZBrush. So only triangles and quads only. But this is all, you know, pretty safe in terms of this. So basically, if you wanted something like this, you would just need to modify it. So let's think here. Let me put this over to the side. Let's see if we can do this shape for you quick. And then we're going to move over to tire. So let's see if we get this here. All right, so for this one, we have basically a point. You guys aren't going to see this image, but just remember what I just had on screen. Just remember. And so we can extend these out. So we need a middle point, and then we need one through here and one through here. Now, if you have symmetry on when you do this, it's obviously going to be easier too. And we'll put this here and this here. And then for center point to here to here. So this one, we want these triangles through here, right? So we can come across this and we can use, there's a bridge action for points. So you can go bridge 2 points. And then in here, we can select 1 point and select another point. And this is going to allow you to come through and say bridge 2 points. So it's basically doing a split, but reality, what it's doing is just showing you the triangle in between the quad. So you're not going to be able to do a split 2 points from here to here with the ZModeler brush and have it go. You're going to have to do click, click, and go that route. Now you can also use the slice brushes to kind of get this result too. And this is probably Paul's video. Paul's stream he did yesterday. He did a lot of the stuff with the slice brushes and quads, and that would probably be your best bet in terms of getting this topology like really easy out of your mesh. Because basically you can just come through with a slice brush, so you can hold Control and Shift. And by default, you're going to have the select rectangle brush, but you can change this to the slice curve brush. And with this brush, if I come across my topology and click and drag, it's going to slice the topology through it. So this way you can come through and actually cut your mesh up pretty quick. Now you'll notice as it cuts, it's going to be, you know, wherever you had that line, it's going to slice through. So I've got some small triangulation stuff here, but you can come through and say, manipulate that roof design and come through and just add that through there really quickly. But basically you just come through and add your triangles. It's probably going to take me a little bit longer than a second to do this one. So I think that ceiling could definitely be done. So basically just think about how each of those points in that ceiling picture you sent is its own area. And then you can use things like the split option to split the points. Where is it at? It's where's the edge? There's an edge split too. Split, split, split. And this will actually put a point in the middle of the edge. So if you want that to be a quad, click that. Now it's giving you this kind of shape. And then if you want to collapse this edge through here, just hover over that edge, go to collapse, then you can remove it. And then now I can split this one here, or bridge rather. And so now I have that kind of triangle shape. And so you just basically would do that for the entire mesh. So you can split to add topology, you can use the slice brush to add topology, but basically you want to mimic that design you had in your picture with topology. So this, all these little things right here, like this would be a vertice, edge, vertice, edge, vertice, edge, vertice, edge, and just get this exact shape. And then after you have that, you can use that inset option on all those faces, and it's going to hit all the faces and give you that design. And then once you have it as that, you can then, you know, apply multiple polygons to that edge using the multiple insert edge loop. And then you could use some of the deformers or something to bend the roof out, which will give you that cathedral shape. That one's actually be a pretty fun one to model out. I may add it to, see if I can get a Ask ZBrush video for you too. That'd be a fun one to do. Taking a note. Taking a note. All right. Look at these questions quick. Split the mesh and Dynamesh on each one. So Dark Knight's asking about combining meshes and using Dynamesh. So for anything you do with geometry, if you want to combine shapes, I'd recommend using the live Boolean system. I'm not going to go into it today for that, but If you use the live Boolean system, there's an example file in the project here, Boolean area. There's this computer case fan. You can get that and follow along with the ZClassroom video as well. On that, you'll go through the steps. But basically, the live Boolean system is going to allow you to take shapes, and if they're intersecting, it's going to keep the geometry of your original meshes and only change where it intersects. And so that's a big thing for, like, you know, toys or anything else, because say you have an arm of a character and you've got the topology perfect where you want it. You've got all the details where you want it, but then you find out, hey, I've got to cut it off, and then I've got to add a key to that joint. Well, if you use pure Dynamesh, what Dynamesh is going to do, it's going to flood the entire model. And so if you add a key in the shoulder joint and then you re-Dynamesh the arm, it's going to change the topology across the entire arm. It's not going to change the part just where that key was, it's changing everything. And so what you can do is use the live Booleans instead, and it's going to keep the topology exactly the way the arm had it. It's going to keep the topology exactly the way the key had it, and the only thing it's going to change is the topology where they intersect. So as long as you have like border edges when those things are together and you do the Boolean process, it's going to generate just triangles along that connection area, and then those edges that you've established will keep it from going crazy. So definitely I'll take note of that one too for when we go over the Boolean stuff, and I'll show a process with the keys for, say, like an arm example, where it's you have a Dynamesh part, you have a non-Dynamesh part, and then you can combine them together and you'll see the differences, or see it holds the geometry. The split will, so James is asking, does the split just split on the front or also split the back as well? So it's only going to split whatever you have selected. So it's not going to go, if I'm using the ZModeler, any of these split options in here, so like split edge, it's only going to affect the edge I click on. Now, if I use the slice brush, which was this here, this is going to go all the way through. So the slice brush, which is holding Control and Shift, and you can replace that, use that instead of the rectangle brush, that's going to go all the way through. So you can see that sliced all the way through the model. Now, if you want to project or protect part of your model, you can also use visibility. So if you hold down Control and Shift, you can get a visibility box like this. And if you hold down Alt, you can hide. And now if I perform that slice curve, it's only going to affect the visible part of your geometry, and then if you hold Control and Shift and bring it back, you can see the rest has stayed the same. However, this can quickly get very dirty because you're going to be adding edges that aren't going to weld anymore. So if I smooth this, you may sometimes have parts where it's not going to be welded. So just be careful when you're using visibility and slicing together. But you can definitely use that to only have the slice brush affect a part. So if I just wanted to put a circle here with, say, the slice brush, and I only want on this side, you know, I can definitely do that and then bring this back and you're going to be okay. So just be careful when you're using visibility and slicing. ZRemesher will not keep any UVs, so it's going to give you entirely new topology. It has no reference points for your older UVs. So if you use ZRemesher, you're going to have to re-UV. Nerb is asking, is the way to have a path and lathe it to, say, a bottle, for example? So there's a brush in here you can go to that is called the Curve Lathe Brush. You can try that. This will allow you to kind of draw a spline out on the canvas, and then it'll give you a curve and it'll basically circleize it, right? So like taking it and lofting it around in a circle. And then you can manipulate the curve and change the shape. That's probably your best way for that option. There's also some other things you can do with array mesh and live booleans, but they're all more kind of advanced stuff. But I'd say try the curve lathe option brush there and see if that kind of gives you what you want. If not, there's some boolean options you can do too. I'm reading these questions quick. So Pedro's asking about pinches. So we're gonna. I've got a few more minutes here before I need to get it on tire. He's asking about pinches, using creasing with sharp edges, especially when there is extrusions in a curved surface. So the pinches can sometimes happen if you have geometry that's too close together, or it's just, you know, based on your subdivision level. So with this one here, or rather the crease level. So with this, let me get back to, let's cube this guy back out. And let's go, and we're going to crease everything here and turn on dynamic. So sometimes with the creasing, basically if you have a pole that's in like multiple edges connecting a point. Sometimes that's hard to smooth out, and that's a sculptural thing. It's not really ZModeler related, but if you have that, there is a process you can use that when you smooth, let's see if I can load up a tool here really quick and show you this. Let's get this quick. Tangent mode. We always got to have some tangent. Let's see if I can get this to do it. So let's say I smooth this out. And you can see with the topology here, I'm getting this little point. And this is because the underlying geometry has all these points going together. And so this other area is smoothing really nice because they're all nice quadded surfaces going in like, you know, a very straight city. And the point here in the middle has like 3 edges going to 1 point. So it's irregular topology based on the surrounding area. So when you start smoothing this, you're going to see the difference in this zone compared to the other areas on your smooth. Now there's an alternate smoothing functionality you can do inside of ZBrush, and this will take this and it's going to apply like on a relax instead of a smooth, and it's going to help resolve any of those areas where you may have points. So for this one here, if I smooth it out, eventually I'd probably get that point vanishing, but if I want to smooth it out quickly, basically you can hold down Shift and start smoothing, and then release Shift, and this is going to perform this polish or relax. And this is going to allow you to remove any of those areas of topology where you may have those spikes or points. So you can see that is pretty much polished that away. Now if I did it just with smooth itself, you can see how it's still kind of staying there, and I still have that little point that's hitting the surface there. So using the alternate smooth, which is holding down Shift, starting to smooth, releasing Shift, and continuing to smooth, and I'll smooth out that point. So tangent there, but related to points on your model and how to kind of get rid of them. And so if you're sculpting and you come across those, that's the solution there. For my, I'll go back to my Q cube. Now where was I? I gotta remember here. All right, so the other one with the creasing, so let's go apply creasing here to this, and then we'll activate the dynamic subdivision here. And so these edges are pretty sharp, and the sharpness of these edges are going to be controlled by a crease level. So right now, anywhere I have creases, if I apply normal divisions or I apply dynamic subdivisions, it's going to keep those edges harsh. And so they're always going to be harsh. If I turn on my polyframes here, you can see how harsh this cube is, right? So let's say I want to soften them up a little bit. So what I can do is I can change my crease level, and that's done with this little slider here. So this is in Tool, Geometry, Crease, and there's a crease level right here. And if you change this, this is telling ZBrush, hey, hold that crease until this subdivision level and then apply a normal smooth. So my smoothing subdivision level right now with dynamic is set to 3. So I'm dividing 3 times on this model in preview mode. Now if my crease slider is select to 3, ZBrush is going to hold the crease on subdivision 1, hold the crease on subdivision 2, hold the crease on subdivision 3, and then if there's a subdivision 4, then ZBrush is going to let go of that crease and smooth normally. So if I change this to 1 or 2, you're going to see that my model is going to change now. So right now I'm telling ZBrush, hey, divide 3 times. On subdivision 1, hold the creasing. Subdivision 2, don't hold the creasing. Subdivision 3, don't hold the creasing. And so it's relaxing or releasing the creasing, and then that's allowing me to get a smoother transition from that crease. So if I change this to 2, now ZBrush is doing it. It's going to hold the creasing to level 2, level 3, it's going to let it go. And so if I come up here and change this, I'm now going to get this bevel cube effect. So it's based on the creasing level if you have creasing on your model. So if you want to keep away from really, really hard edges, just tone down this crease level and tell ZBrush, hey, after so many subdivisions or dynamic subdivision, smooth subdivisions, let go of the crease and then you'll get a smoother result. So one little thing there with that. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but hopefully it helps some. And this is going to stay the, if you have any of this dynamic on, it's going to remember that. So as I'm using the option here, if I have any creasing on my mesh, it's going to retain that. And then I can always come over here and change this if I wanted to be harsher or not as harsh. So little fun things there with the crease level, and that will work with the smooth subdivision slider in dynamic, and it will also work when you apply traditional subdivisions on your mesh. Edit mode's asking, show a Zoom meeting where people can screen share. That actually might not be a bad thing. I'll pass it up the chain and see what they say. I don't think it'd be too bad. We could probably do it. Smoky Tubers is asking, well, we need to reload our configs and hotkey settings if we install the new 2020 update. So if there's any updates to 2020 in their point releases, you should not. So if you upgraded from 2020 to 2020.1.1, definitely you're not gonna have to change anything. It should be fine. Thank you, Dougie. Yes, there's a sweep profile tool too, in addition to that curved lathe. Creating noodles in ZBrush, you could use, there's some brushes here that you can use, like the curved multi-tube. You can start using some curves like that and create noodles. For my keyboard, I'm using a, this is a Noboard is what it is, N-O-H-B-O-A-R-D. And then I'm using another application called On Top Replica to get it to float on top of ZBrush. So I actually have a full-size version that's living over the other screen here, and this is On Top Replica, taking the no board and then allowing me to force it on top of ZBrush as I do this. All right. Okay, so now we're going to get to the process that you guys came here for on how to model a tire. So I want to hit a few things with this, and first thing I want to do is I want to talk briefly about primitives. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this by just going to Lightbox, so clicking Lightbox up here, and then once Lightbox is open and go to Project, I'm going to select this sphere 128 and load it in. I'm going to say no to my saving of my project here. And I'm going to start with the sphere here, and I'm going to go through the process of going to the tool palette and grabbing a primitive. And then we're going to create a quick cylinder shape with a set number of divisions, and then we're going to use the ZModeler brush to model a tire. All right, so the first thing here is that we now have loaded in our sphere. And now we need to go, and I want to select a cylinder primitive from the tool palette over here. Now, as they were mentioned in the stream here, there are a few ways you can do this. I could go to the Gizmo 3D and select one of the primitives on there. I could go to the tool palette, go all the way down to the initialize menu and say generate a cylinder object down here. But instead of this, what I want to do is I want to modify a primitive. And so there's a bunch of primitives inside of ZBrush that are located in the tool palette. And these live over here. So if I click on any one of these, you can see this will open up. And in here, you have a bunch of different primitives that have this 3D next to them. Now, pretty much all of these that have 3D are going to be able to be modified through this initialize menu. So these are primitive objects. They're not polymesh objects. So if you select one of these objects, you're not going to be able to sculpt on it, but you can modify it. And then after you're done with the modifications, you can then convert it to a polymesh object, and then you can sculpt on it. So in here we have a few of these, and the only one that's not going to give you this initialize menu is this polymesh 3D, and that is a true polymesh object. So a little bit of confusion there. We have a bunch of 3D ones, but this one also has a 3D, but just that one doesn't have the initialize menu that you're looking for pretty much. So that's a model. If you load that one, you're gonna be able to sculpt on it. So what I want to do is I want to select this cylinder 3D one right here. And so if I select that, you're going to see this is what I'm going to get. So I have a cylinder object, and it's over here, a new subtool. Now if I try to come through and sculpt on this, so let's say I take the clay tubes brush and click sculpt, see nothing's going to happen. So this is how you know if you have a primitive. Basically, if you try to sculpt anything on it, you're going to get a wah, wah, wah. I'm not going to let you do it. The other way to know if you have a primitive object is if you scroll down to the bottom here and you open up the initialize tab. The initialize tab for that object will have a bunch of parameters you can change. And so these are basically going to allow you to manipulate this primitive object to different things. So if I don't want this to be a perfect cylinder, I can come and change these sliders and get a different result. So one thing here is we have the align option, so I can change how I want my cylinder to be aligned. So we have this little head here that's showing us my direction. So you can see I'm kind of looking at his forehead here. So I know this is pretty much the front of the cylinder here. So for the tire, I want to make sure that I'm, facing this way with the tire. So the tire would be going down like this. And then if I go to the side, this would be where I'd get the hub and the rest of the wheel. So I'm going to change my axis here to align X. Next thing we can do is we can change some different variables. So we have an inner radius. This will allow us to get a tube shape out of this if we want. So I'm going to keep that down to 0. We also have an H divide and a V divide. So if I turn on my polyframes, if I change my V divide, you'll see this is going to change those vertical lines across the cylinder there. And for this one here, I want to just slam it all the way down to 3. So that's only going to give me 1 here, 2, and then the middle points. And then for the H divide, I usually try to keep this in either powers of 6 or powers of 8. So 6 and 12, or I'll do 8 and then 16 and then 32. So I usually kind of keep those there. This gives you an even number of your cylinder object, and so we can do some other things with this if we keep these divides even. So if I come up here and I say change this to say 32, this is now going to give me 32 divides around the top there. Now I have some other different options here with this initialize. You can taper the top, you can change the size of it. We're just going to keep all those pretty much standard. And anytime you have a 3D object, they're going to have its initialize menu, and in here you may have a bunch of different things you can do in here. So this is just the one for the cylinder. Now after I'm happy with the changes here, now to get this to a mesh that I can use with brushes, like say the Clay Tubes brush or even say the ZModeler brush, I need to convert it to a polymesh object. And so if I go to the tool palette here, I just need to click this Make Polymesh 3D, and this is going to take this and it's going to convert it to a polymesh. Now I'm going through this in terms of the basic stuff because you're going to run into these primitives. You can use these to create forms. Another thing you can do is there's a preset that's already loaded with a bunch of these primitives forms in Lightbox. So if I come to Lightbox here and I open that up, in here at the top here next to those spheres we're loading in, there is a primitives.zpr file. And this will load in some primitive files that already are set up with creasing. They already have the kind of proper amounts of edge looping and divisions around the things. So you can just grab that, load it in, and get a really nice head start on your modeling. So that's usually where I'll go to if I'm modeling anything with the ZModeler brush. I usually grab that primitives brush and use that. But there's the option today, we just went through and created one out of the primitive tools here. So let's see here. So with this, I'm now ready to start using the ZModeler brush. So I'm going to select the ZModeler brush again, and I should probably put up these little slideshows or Kyle's going to be mad at me. These are just showing you the dates, dates and times. I think Paul moves his. I need to probably do that too. I'll put my keyboard here for now. All right, so now I'm going to select the ZModeler brush. So once again, to select a brush, you just need to press B and then remember the 2 letters that go with the brush you want. So the ZModeler brush begins with the letter Z, so B and Z will isolate the ZModeler brush, and then the last button press for ZModeler is M. So BZM will give me the ZModeler brush. One thing with the ZModeler brush too, another little addition here. So if you have different options that you like, so let's say you always find yourself using extrude instead of Q-mesh, or say when you're over an edge, you always end up using, say collapse instead of insert. Well, you can come through and set these up in a ZModeler brush and then save this out by going to the brush palette and go save as. And you can save this out as a new brush, or you can save over the existing one. And then those options will be remembered. So this will allow you to say, set up a custom ZModeler brush just for yourself. You can set up multiples. So if you have one that you just want for say extrusion and you have one that you just want for Q-mesh, you can have both those brushes living in ZBrush, and then you can just toggle them with the hotkeys like we just did to say select the standard brush or the ZModeler brush, and then you don't have to go through that spacebar menu. So a little bit high level stuff there, but basically you can save what options you choose, and so then that brush will remember it next time you go back to it. So you don't, if you find yourself always switching to something with the ZModeler brush every single time you use it, just save it as over top of the existing one that's in there, and then you don't have to go through that process. It'll save you a little bit of time. So the first thing I want to do with my cylinder here is I want to add some edge loops in the middle here on the backside. And for the tire, I'm basically focusing on modeling one side of it. And after I have the one side done, I can then flip it and do some other stuff to it. So I'm really just concerned about one single area. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add an edge loop in here, and this just makes kind of a little bit easier, especially when you come through and start modeling stuff, because now you have this nice area you can add other edge loops to, and you don't have to worry about this pole in the center as much. So you could open this as like delete those faces out of there, which will also help quite a bit, because basically that pole, if you don't like condense it down some, if you say divide the model up And let me turn off my polyframes here. You can sometimes start seeing that pole as you use your mesh. So as you're doing it, you're gonna see this kind of like point, and it catches my eye and drives me nuts. So I always try to like taper that pole off down to a very small area as soon as possible. So just taking an edge loop and bringing it in closer so it has less room to kind of mush down to that single point. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to add a middle edge loop through the middle here. So this was the middle of my mesh here. And to do this quickly, I'm just going to use a mirror and weld process. So I can come over here to geometry, and I go down to the modified topology and click mirror and weld. And this will now apply at middle edge. Now the mirror and weld is going to go from one side to the other. So basically when I did that, you can see my edge disappeared because it took this side and mirrored it over there. So if you can see your little head here, the mirroring is always going to happen from where the end point of this is. So think of this like less than to greater. So it's going to take the less than side and then go to the other side. So if I want this edge loop to go on the other side, basically you can just easily just create it over here. And then when you click mirror and weld, now you have that point directly in the center of the mesh, and you have it on the other side too. So just putting a point right down the middle of my cylinder. I could also set the divide to have like one division and it would have been down the cylinder. I could use the insert multi option, a bunch of different ways, but you guys got the mirror weld approach today. Reading questions here. Why does the ZModeler Open have polysphere in the ribbon? Can we stop the ribbon from opening and taking up screen space? All right, so this little thing here is the IMM viewer bar. This is what the question is asking about. Is there a way when I have the ZModeler brush selected to not have this visible? So what this is showing you is that the ZModeler brush by default has this property called nanomesh, and nanomesh will allow you to take a inserted geometry piece and apply it to polys of your model. There's a whole bunch of videos on that, and it gives a really cool result when you take topology and just apply it everywhere across the surface. So what this is telling you when you select the ZModeler brush is saying, hey, this part, this cube here is built into the ZModeler brush by default. So oftentimes if you select, say, an insert mesh brush, let me grab this one here, you can see this is going to have a ton of different options up at the top here. So these are all the parts in that one. And the ZModeler brush by default will always have one part embedded in it to use with this nanomesh option. You can disable this by going to the preferences pad here, and let me find out where this is. You might have already answered the question here. But there is a option here. Let me find this quick. Wait for it, wait for it. And you can turn this off. But it's going to take me a second because I don't exactly remember where this is. You guys are going to get the long run here. I should know where this is. And I don't. I have a video on it. All right, I may have to give up here in a minute because it's here somewhere, but I can't remember. If anyone remembers where it is, where to hide the IMM viewer bar. Oh man, oh man. Okay, someone needs to do a YouTube search for Ask ZBrush how to hide the IMM viewer bar, and that will I can turn it off for you guys. But yeah, there is a way. You can also switch which side it's on to, so it doesn't have to live up top. It can live over here, and live over here, or it can live on the bottom. So definitely you can disable it, and then you can save that out, and it will be remembered when you launch ZBrush again, and then when you go and select a ZModeler brush or an IMM part out of ZBrush, then it will no longer display that viewer bar at the top. So one little thing there. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Gary's asking, is merging the only way to bridge between two subtools? So you can do a lot of things. The welding, you can merge points. There's a lot of ways you can merge subtools together, but basically you need to join them together with the merge. That's one way, which is going to take everything that's visible and merge it together. The live Boolean process, if you run that, it's going to go through and kind of do that same process. It's going to look at this subtool and then look at the next one and combine them and then go to the next. But merge for just taking two subtools and putting them together but not welding the geometry together is the way to do it, yes. So this head in the top corner is the cam view, and if you go to preferences and go down here to the cam view area, I know where this setting is. There's a next option. You also have the ability to make your own cam views with any models you have loaded in, so you can do that and click it. You can change the size of this. You can also, there's some preset ones you can load. There's an earthquake one in there. So definitely there's some different ones you can cycle through, but that's where it's located. Preferences, cam view. Let's see what else we got here. Yes, there is a video where I make a tire too on Ask ZBrush. I'll get the link for that in a second. Interface IMM viewer. Let's go. Interface IMM viewer. Thank you. Here's show and hide. So if you switch this, you can see I can change the placement of it, where it's going to go. And then if I click show and hide, it's going to hide it. So that is how you can get rid of it. Thank you, Pedro. Look at that. Profit. All right. So now let's start working on this tire. So the one thing I like doing with this is while you're doing this, it's fun to do this process where if you hold down Alt and click and drag, you kind of get this weird, little rolly kind of selection, and it's actually pretty fun to do, but it takes a little while. So you can definitely say if I wanted to extrude out these faces, I could tag them really quick and extrude and get shapes like this. But the more efficient way is to activate symmetry and not only have it just symmetrical in one axis, but coming through and using it with radial. So if I go to the transform template here, there's the activate symmetry button, which I can hit with X. And then down here we have different axes, and then we have this little R icon, which is going to activate radial symmetry. So if I turn R on, you're going to see it's going to give me this radial option, right? So now I'm able to perform ZModeler Actions based on the center of this shape here. And so as I rotate around, you can see that it performed the actions in 8 ways. So I go to the transform again, you can see my radial count set to 8. So I had 32 sides on this mesh, and so I can extrude now at 8, and I can modify just at those 8 levels, okay? For this one, I want to up it to 16, so I'm modifying one every other and leaving a space in between. So since this was 32, I should have a nice spacing between everything. So I'm going to come back up here to transform. I've changed my radial count to 16. And now when I come across my model and perform any of those poly actions, you're going to see it's going to give me this effect. So this is handy when making things that are cylindrical because it speeds up the process. And it also, you can allow you to get different designs. So I could do by 4, I could do, whatever those power that would go down evenly, you can start modifying your shape. Now what I like doing for the tire here is first I'll establish, the inner shape, and then I'll establish, the edge rim, and then I'll usually establish the tread in the middle. And all this is using pretty much radial symmetry as I do this. A lot of insert edge looping, so I'll come in and just start inserting stuff. The another one that I use a lot with the inserting option is there is one, if I hover the edge here and press spacebar, go in the edge action menu, there is a polygroup option. And with the polygroup action here, there's a poly loop process. And this will allow me to come through and generate a different polygroup across an entire poly loop. So we talked about polygroups as a way to set different zones on your model, and then you can use those with those targets. So I can come through and say set this as a poly loop, and now it's gone through and given me a polygroup across that entire area. Now I can do things like come across this poly here, switch to say the Q mesh action. Let me do this one up here so you guys can see it. So it's the Q mesh action, changed my target from a single polygroup to polygroup all. And now when I apply this, it's going to apply it to that polygroup. And so now I can get this and start generating that shape. Now we also talked about that multiple insert edge loop. So I can go back to the insert again, choose multiple edge loops. I can turn that interactive resolution on and put the interactive elevation on. And I can come through and now click and drag, and now I can add that shape too. So I'm expanded it out, set a polygroup for it, added that edge through there, and then I use the elevation with that multi-edge loops, and now I have this kind of raised rim. So there's a lot of things you can do with that kind of stuff. Now the other one that's really fun is if I come across an edge here and hit spacebar and go back to that polygroup again, I'm going to come through and just give this a new polygroup. And so while I'm doing this, if you click and then hold down Alt, you can cycle through, or press Alt, you can cycle through polygroup coloring. So if you have an area that has the same polygroup, you can just cycle this and now give this area a new polygroup. So this is going to separate that middle area from this outer area now. And now that I have this middle area, I can now perform a Q-mesh action just on that area if I want. And I'm not going to deform that polygroup colors on the other side. Now with this Q-mesh action in this radial format, I can also use that modifier shift, which is going to perform that move. And this is handy if, say, like I did this design through here, and then I decided, hey, I want this to be a little bit thicker. So I can come across this inner polygroup, click and drag, and as I'm dragging, I can hold down shift, and this is now going to do this kind of move. So it's moving that face instead of welding it or extruding it. And now I can tailor that depth. So I can make this smaller instead of larger, right? So I can get it to that size now. So you can come through and play just with that stuff. And using this radial symmetry is going to give you a lot of kind of control on this, because you can do the process on one side and it's going to do the whole rim. It's not going to affect anything. And then you can also say, if I only want to affect one part, set it back to single poly, and I can now only affect a part as well. So for this stuff, I'm going to come through here and I'm going to just kind of push this back in. So I want to start generating this kind of wheel hub through here. So I want to pull this back so I have more space to work with on this outer side. So I'm going to come in, hold down Alt. You can select stuff this way too if you're on a single poly still. I can pull this in. If I hold down Shift, it's going to give me this effect. So ready, it's moving it back instead of placing it. So I can get this back into here, say like that. I can add some more edge loops through here with that Insert Single Edge Loop option. Say add this in. If you add an edge loop and you have intensity turned on, this will also allow you to kind of add the edge, and then it's going to perform a inflate basically on that edge and move it in. So if I have my intensity cranked up and click this, let me turn it up a little bit more here. It should start pulling that edge out. So you can see it's not following that flat. If I do it on this side, you'll see it a little bit better. Oh, it's failing me. Well, it should play with the intensity too. I think my radial symmetry is causing it chaos. So much radial symmetry. But I'll come in and just start inserting edge loops into these areas here. And then I'll start playing with that multiple edge loops to kind of just get different designs. So I'll add, you know, another little rim there, little part through there. Maybe on these things here, I'll add another edge. And then if I get multiples, I can add a new polygroup. Then I can perform that Q-mesh action with polygroup all and hold down Shift, and I can move these things out. And you can see I can just start manipulating the forms. And radials are really easy. Anything that's like a cylindrical shape is always pretty easy to model, because you're basically just, you know, doing a scaling, right? So you have that row of edges and you're scaling in and out, and it's giving you the form. So do that there. Now for this area on the back here, I kind of want to, you know, make this a little bit bigger. So I want to start growing my tire outward. So I'm going to add a new polygroup here by polyloop. And then I'll do the same one over there. So since I didn't hit Alt, it's given this the same polygroup. And now I can Q-mesh and hold down Shift and start bringing my tire shape out some. Now I can add some different elements here. Another thing that's nice is oftentimes, depends what I'm in, I can add an edge loop, add an edge loop, and then I can delete an edge loop, and that will give you that kind of tapered border. You can also use a bevel process. So if I come across this edge loop here and then go into the edge action menu again, there's a bevel. And if you have it on edge loop complete, you can click and drag, and that will also bevel too. So another way to add a little bit of tapering to different areas on your mesh. And so it's really, a lot of the process here is very much, you know, the same steps. So I'm just switching between a very few groups of things here, tagging stuff with different polygroup colors so I can use them later. You know, after I have one I like, and Q-mesh it, pull it out. This one here, I want to get that tire, you know, to have a little bit of bulbous nature to it. So I can just use the insert with multi-edge loops and that interactive resolution, and I can start dragging it out and now start getting that to taper. And then if this edge isn't really doing what I want, I can come in and I can delete that. So now I have it looking round like that through there. So you can see how it's starting to get that tire effect. And you can really play with this to your heart's content. There isn't any right and wrong. If you're trying to match a tire, you can definitely you know, load some image in, use like say the see-through option here to see it in the background, and then you can model around that pretty easy. Let's look at these chats here. So Neo, yeah, if you have a, just ask the question, we'll see. I can't guarantee that I will be able to answer it. MLD Knight is asking, how would you handle topology of a hole on the outside of a cylinder without getting rendering artifacts? Do you have an example of that? So like you want, so if I want a hole, say here, through this area, basically, let's see, maybe, so we'll see if this is what you're asking. So let's say I want to add a hole, you know, in this part here, or maybe on this edge. And so what I'd do here is first I'd come through and I want to add some edge loops to protect that area. And you're doing this because if you have an area where you have a circle, it's basically going to change the topology around the areas. And you don't want long triangles coming from here to your circle. That's going to create this like crazy artifacts, and it's not going to look smooth. So what you want to do in here is you want to basically protect that edge first. And so if you want to create the hole on an edge, you want to make sure you add topology in the middle and in the edge, and then this is where you create your hole. If you're creating it on a poly, you'd want to add just the border protection around it. And so that's the two options there if you want to add it on a poly, and then if I wanted to add it on an edge, that's where I do it here. Now to add it on an edge, you can hover over the point, and there is an option called ring. And in here you have basically come through and I can create a ring. Oh, not ring, it's not what I want. I want split point. And this will come through and it's going to split the point. Now you'll see what's happening when I split this. Those protecting edges came in, right? So there, if I didn't do those protective edges and I just added one edge loop and split the point, you see it's going out further than I really want it. So if I want a big circle, this is maybe okay, but see these triangles in here? So you want to kind of reduce that as much as you can. So add, you know, protective edges around there. If your cylinder is really dense, you're going to get a better kind of result out of it. And so now when you put this out, you're not getting this craziness. The next thing with this kind of stuff, I usually double it. So I'll do one point and then I'll do another one. So it's just adding another layer of protection to the circle. So splitting once and then splitting again. And now I have this kind of effect. So I have this ring, which is going to add another layer of protection that I can then go in and say smooth out and keep that transition flowing nice, rather than having it going from here to here. And then after I have these, I'd come through and say grab those, and then you can Q-mesh them in. And that would be kind of how I'd handle kind of circles on the edge there. Now your creasing is going to come into play a lot on this as well. So when you apply your dynamic subdivisions, you will have to go in and modify some of your creasing some, but that would be the way I'd probably go about adding those there. The other option that would work really well is that you could take it and instead of doing it manually like this, what I do is I'd model your tire or your cylinder, and then I'd use the live Boolean system. So I'd take your tire, get it how you want it looking with that nice smooth edge, convert your dynamic if you're using it to traditional subdivisions, and then apply cylinders where you want them afterwards, and then use the live Boolean to cut those cylinders out. That's going to keep your tire looking nice and fluid all the way around. You're not going to get any geometry artifacts, and then those cylinders are going to cut in exactly where you want them. So that would be the other option there you can do. Your mesh will be higher polygon count than this, but you won't have to go in and manually manipulate the topology quite a bit. It'd be a little faster, but it would not leave you with a nice little low-res cage. Questions here. So Tenacity is asking, oh, you missed the class again. So all these are on replay too, so they definitely will be on YouTube and you can rewatch them. My next stream will be next Wednesday, so I can't remember what I'm covering on Wednesday. Maybe Boolean stuff. And then I'll be back on Friday too. So we're trying to keep all the, at least one of us developers here from Pixologic are trying to stream every day during this coronavirus craziness. Pro is asking, how do you do another hull of a Viking ship? So you can start with a cube and just start modeling. You could get it. It would take you a little while. There's the brushes that would be handy for that would be there's a move. Let's isolate by M here. Move infinite depth would be a lot. Move your friend through there. You can also do some cool things with bridging. So we're going to take a break from the tire here. I'm going to save this out. I'm going to do a little tangent, because the tire really I just need to add some treads and then flip it over and we'll be good to go. But let's go over here and let's grab that polysphere and we'll initialize it and convert it to a Q-cube. So this is another thing you can do with geometry and the ZModeler brush, which is pretty fun. So let's say I have my cube here and I'm just going to move it off into space. If you ever have this happen, this is because you have symmetry turned on. So if you have the Gizmo 3D and you go and you're trying to move a part in space and you're getting this craziness, this will happen. If you're starting to learn ZBrush, you have the trial and you go to move, you're like, I just want to move the box to the left, and this happens, it's because you have symmetry active. So you need to go transform and turn off symmetry or press X on your keyboard, and then now you'll be able to move it and it won't do that stretchy thing. So one little thing there that sometimes you'll run into if you're basically brand new to ZBrush here. So with this cube here, I want to make two of these. So I want to have one over here and one over here. So I'm going to the Geometry tab and I'm use Mirror and Weld, and it's going to take this one. Since there's nothing over here, it's going to say, hey, you probably want this side, and it's going to mirror it over the other side. So now I have two of these cubes. Now that I have two of these cubes, what I want to do is I want to delete some faces. And we had a question about how you can make a hull of a Viking ship. So basically I'd model, your back of your ship, and then for like the front bow part where it's doing this, what we can do is we can use the bridge to holes option here, and it'll make a curve between one side to the other, and it does a pretty nice result. You can change the splines, the variable or the modifiers on it, and it'll end up giving you this nice curved shape. And you can do this with a lot of things. So if you're making pipes, you can generate one pipe here and then generate one pipe here and then bridge those two holes, and it'll make that nice curved surface. So for this, I'm going to hover over a poly on both sides here and press spacebar. I'm going to choose the delete option this time. Make sure it's on a single poly. I'm going to click, and then delete those. So I've just removed those two polys there. And now I want to bridge from here to here. And I'm going to bridge these two holes, and this is going to give me this shape that's going to come out. So I kind of want to position this so I can see both these edges and then have enough room to kind of control this. I'm going to hover over one of the edges, press spacebar to go in the ZModeler Edge Action menu. Let me hover over this one so you guys can see it. And I'm going to choose Bridge, and then down here we have the two hole option. We have a bunch of different variables we can choose. You have to have a bunch of different stuff with curvature, so you can choose, standard curvature and have it modify. Once again, there's videos on all this on ZClassroom. If you just do a search on ZClassroom for ZModeler, it'll go into all these different variables. So with this, I'm going to click one side over here, and then I'm going to click the next side, and it's now going to perform this bridge. Now when it's performing the bridge, I can now scroll up and down, and this will allow me to adjust the amount of topology that's being applied, right? So I'm just scrolling up and down with my mouse, and now I'm getting this curve. So if I was going to create something ship-like, I'd come through and just set up my areas, and then now I've got this kind of shape here. I can then come in now and say Q-mesh these guys out. We can do a single poly, not all polys. And I can clean this up. I can then come through and say, oh, I want this angled a little bit more. Hold down that Alt button for that temporary polygroup. Come across all these guys here. Q-mesh and hold Shift. And now I start to get that shape, right? Fix this other side too. And so that would be kind of how I'd go through and start, modeling that whole, that ship. So doing something like that, and using the option of where you're setting your points, and then you're using curves to generate the area in between, and then you can now modify the shape to get that where you want it. And you can do the curves down here too. So if I come through here and I do delete this one, and this one, this one, and this one, I can do that bridge two holes again. First point, second point. Now I got that part, right? And so you kind of see where I'm going with this. And then you can now use the Q-mesh action here, and this is going to bridge these out. And so you can go that way down your ship. Now you probably will at some point have to come through and grab some polygons and then scale them down, but that way you can kind of get the shape of that kind of ship hull out of it. And you won't have to do too much. The other thing too, with it, if you're modeling shapes like this, it's oftentimes easier not to have back faces on the inside too. So you can actually come through and say polygroup, these poly loops, and just tag all these areas, and then delete polygroup all. And basically we want just the whole, right, the inner and the outside. And then now we can go to the tool palette, go to the polygroup area and do an auto groups, which is going to look at those geometry islands. If I turn on double here, you'll be able to see this. So I have the inner and the outer. And now I can just hold Control and Shift and select the outer and then now delete hidden. And now I'm left with, less geometry to manipulate. So if I need to perform, a move or something with the Gizmo 3D, I don't have to worry about that middle topology anymore. And then after I have my shell generated, I can come through and now just Q-mesh all polygons, and this is now going to give me my thickness. So you can always come through and model, like it's a lot easier to model single-sided sometimes because you don't have to worry about the double amount of vertices in the middle. So if I'm coming through and I want to select, these parts and move them, I may not select the ones in the middle correctly, and then I've got a mess of topology in the middle. So if you can do something like this where you're isolating just the outer shells, you're finishing your building that way, and then you can come back in and add thickness using the Q-mesh action, that's another way it's going to save you some time. Pedro's asking about curvature and adding an edge loop. So if I come through here and say remove this edge loop here, and I want to add this back and give curvature to it, basically in here, move my keyboard. If you go to the insert option, multiple edge loops, there is an average normals right here, and this should do what I'm looking for. Where's it at? Maybe it's smooth elevation. There you go. Smooth elevation. I don't think it's average normals. Let's turn. Yep. And smooth elevation will go through and it'll look at that curvature there and add it. So if you come through and keep adding this, it's going to end up smoothing that surface. So that's the process there if you have like an area and you want to add an edge and have it follow the flow. So that is just taking it, you go spacebar into the edge action menu, choose multiple edge loops, and then change your elevation to smooth elevation, and then click and it should add it. All right, let's go back to this tire quick. Tire. All right, so now that I got this, I can add some more details to this as well, but I want to start adding the tread back here. So I'm going to come through and just Q-mesh some of these areas. So I have this set to all polygons and change it to single. Click and drag to add that. And this, once again, that alt temporary polygroup, so I can add it quickly. And then now if I perform that Q-mesh action, it's going to add that tread surface through there. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to kill the back part here. So I don't really need this back area. So I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and let me get my select rectangle brush. And drag this out, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key to make it red, and I'll just hide that. So this is what I've got here for the back part. And then I'm going to go to the geometry, modify topology, and I'm going to delete hidden, and that's going to remove that back side. And now you have a few different options here you can do. So if you want the tread to say have a design that's a little bit different. So on this side, this tread goes to say here, and on that side, the tread goes in between the other space. Basically, you can just isolate part of your tire like this. And then once you have one of those parts isolated, I can now make a duplicate and mirror it over. If I want the tread to be, kind of have a symmetrical kind of V shape through here, I can now just perform a mirror and weld on this. Oh, make sure I got my right axis here. Let's move this over. So let me make sure my geometry is hidden. I can mirror this and then do a mirror and weld, and that's going to give me that. And then I could easily just come in, mask out that center part, grab the Gizmo 3D and rotate, and then now I've got that tread kind of effect. So that's the easy one. So basically I took the one tire, mirrored it over the other side, and then I can just grab the topology in the middle there and then just rotate it with the Gizmo 3D, and that's going to give me that kind of tread pattern like this. Now the more topology I have in the middle there, or wherever I decide to put that masking, is going to determine how much of that is going to be generated, but that's the quick one there. Now the other way is if I take my model here and I'm going to move it out past the middle line. So you can see if I have the floor grid on, this is going to give me the 0 axis of the world, and I want to move this out. So if I have it on the axis and I perform mirror and weld, it's going to weld right down the middle, right? So it's going to take this, and then it's going to weld these two together. I want that space, so I'm going to take this and move it out. And now when I perform mirror and weld, it's going to give me something like this. So now I have a gap in between here. Now, when you have a gap or two models on the opposite sides, if you say use the Gizmo 3D and you have symmetry turned on, let me get our radial here. And you have symmetry turned on, if you use the Gizmo 3D, it's going to try to, basically if you realign it, it's going to put it on one side and the other. And this is going to allow you to move them separately, like this. So it's taking this part and using it, and then taking this part and using it. Now, one thing with this process, when you do it, if you go to scale, it's going to do this kind of weird scale collapse. And sometimes you don't always want this scale collapse to happen. You want it to happen on a local level, but not between this global way. So this is like distorting it way too much. So what you can do is you can activate this local symmetry over here. And now the Gizmo 3D is going to respect that, and it's going to scale it on its own side rather than in the middle. So if you want to do a scale process and you've got two parts, activating local is going to give you a different effect. So here's without local. And then if I have local on and go to scale, it's going to do it locally. So one little thing there, it's often handy too, if you go to scale something and you're like, why isn't this scaling? Why is it scaling weird? Activate local with the symmetry on, and that'll kind of help you out there too. So now that I have these two parts of the tire, I want to take one of them and I want to rotate it so it's off center. So I don't want this part and this part to match. I want the one side to be different. So I know that if I take 316 divided by 32, it's like 11.25. So I'm going to mask part of this, one half of the tire here. And then on the other side, I'm going to switch to the Gizmo 3D. I'm going to click the little go to unmasked mesh center. And you could try to do this at 11.5, but it's going to be a little difficult. You can change your snap settings for this in the Z plugin tab, miscellaneous. There's a snap angle here, but of course 11.5 is probably not going to be able to be getting there. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to go to the tool palette, go to the deformation palette, make sure that one part of the tire is masked, and then I'm going to use this rotate option here. Now you may have to figure out what axis you're on. So by default it's on Z. So nope, it's on X today. And now I can rotate this and you'll see it's going to rotate. So in here I can now type in 11.25 and that's going to give me that exact rotation. And now I have this tire and the other tire, and these parts through here should line up. So you can see they're going all the way through. So now that I have these two separate parts, I want to bridge between these. So I'm going to take this part and bridge it too. It's going to be similar to what we did with that ship. We're making the hole, but this time I'm just going to bridge these parts together. And you'll notice that on these parts too, I have these edges closed off. So this is a key thing here too. If I have these edges open, it's not going to give me the geometry I want. So make sure if you do this process that these are closed and only this middle part is open. This is going to help you when I do this bridge. So now I'm going to hover over one of these edges, press spacebar, go in the ZModeler Edge Action menu. In here I'm going to choose Bridge and then Target of two holes. I'm going to click the one side, rotate and click another side. You don't have to click the exact side. And this will now perform that bridge. I can scale up and down to determine how many segments I want. I really just want one right now. And now I've generated that effect. So I've taken my tire and I've added that bridge between the two. Now with this, I can now modify this some more, so I can go back up and activate my radial symmetry. I can Q-mesh this part to kind of get this to give me that effect. If I wanted to embed it first, what I can do is I can take this and kind of scale the parts here. So let's do that. Make sure I center my gizmo, scale it down. And now I can come through and Q-mesh, and I want to do an extrude on this one. Or actually, I want to do extrude on this one and not affect that other side, so like that. So now I'm getting this cross pattern through here, and I don't want it to fully snap, so you can see I'm kind of letting it only snap partially. And then if I turn my dynamic subdivisions on, you can see they're not connected, and it's going to give me that kind of tread pattern. So that's the kind of the process you can do on that, and then I can scale my entire tire down until it looks something more established through there. Now when I did the scaling on that, you know, see it did also scale the inner part through here. So I can move these back if I want. So I can come through and say, select all these, and then say select this. And this is just me holding Alt, and then since I have radial on, I can just click like pretty much once, and it's going to give me that whole area. And now if I Q-mesh this part and hold down Shift, I probably want to do an extrude instead. And I extrude those polys, you know, in and out. I kind of missed a an important ring in there though. I'll have to get that one. But that's how you can kind of change your shape back to it. Now, one more thing I want to hit with this session here is on the tire itself. I had like a little air nozzle or an air valve. And for this, it's also kind of an easy process too. So let me see if I can move this back first. Fill everything with one. I'm going to give this loop a new polygroup here. And I'm going to Q mesh that polygroup all and move it back so I get it a little bit flatter. There we go, something like that. Now let's say I want to add a little air valve. So I'm going to turn off symmetry by hitting X. I'm going to add 2 loops. So once again, we did that other loop addition where we came through and added protection for the edge. For this one, I want to do it on a poly. So I just added 2 loops there, and I have a single poly here. Now with this single poly, I want to go in here and I want to choose the option of Inset, Single Polygon, and I want Center and Border. And as I drag this out, you see it's going to inset that shape. Now if I hover over this, you're going to see that the hotkey of holding Shift while I do this is going to make that part perfectly square. So if I do this and hold Shift, it's now going to square this out. And now with this being a square, I can now do a Q mesh action, Q it out. Maybe I'll do an extrude instead so it doesn't weld. So this is why you'd switch from Q mesh to extrude. So you can see that part was jumping over there. If I change my brush to a larger draw size, it wouldn't probably snap as much. But you can also just switch to extrude and get that there. And then I can add a little edge loop here. Make sure I have my intensity down there. And then I can add a poly loop and then Q mesh polygroup all or extrude polygroup all. Now I've got that. And now this shape here, since it is perfectly square, if I turn dynamic on, it's going to smooth it and basically make it look round. So if I activate dynamic, you can see I'm going to get that kind of valve shape out of it. So I inset it at a square, I activated dynamic, and that's going to turn it. Now at this stage, I'd probably go through and start doing all my creasing on the model here. So applying a bunch of creasing. You can do it first by edge angle, which is going to look, pretty decent right out the gate. You can see that since that square area was all the way square through there, you probably don't want creasing on that. So I would have to come back in and uncrease these. Let me get my crease option here. And then this will now go back to that roundness. And you can always use visibility to select these things a little easier too. And so now I can see I have my tire and I have that part rounded. Then I can change my smooth thing there and I can start getting that tire form out of it. So here I have a more finalized version of the tire here. This one had a little more love put into it. And so it's basically all the same principle. One thing I like doing with these as well is this was just an insert right through here for this edge. And just making a really small insert edge loop and then taking that polygroup like we did on that other tire and then expanding it out gives you this kind of like nice rubber wear, so this mold line. And all that is a sliver that I've just Q-meshed out on its own. It's the same with this thing here. This is just another sliver of geometry that's been pumped out. Same with this one through here. And so all these things, like it's just that kind of process, and it's just think about your edges, and if you make them tiny and come out, it's going to give you a line. If you make them big, it's not going to give you, a finite edge. But this is all dynamic, so if I turn it off, this is what the mesh looks like. And then if I turn dynamic on, this is the result. Now these little pieces here too are all modeled with ZModeler Brush 2, so you definitely can get really complex with your shapes. So you can see here's some of that double edge looping that I was talking about earlier when I added the point split. So you can see I added this protected area through here. And this gives you a lot of control after you've done that circle, because it's a pain to come back in and try to, if you have a circle, it's a pain to come back in and add a circle on top of it. You're basically have to remodel the thing. But if you add this little protective loop around the edge, now if I want to come back in and say, hey, add another little design here, I've got that edge loop, right? So now I can come through and say add a little bit here to that part, and now I'm going to get a different result. If I didn't have that little protective edge loop that I modeled in initially, I wouldn't be able to do that, because basically the edge loop, the edge flow would not have worked. So it would have came off, it would have been like this, And if I went to go and say add an edge loop there, this is what I would have got instead of this. So if you're doing anything cylindrical, I highly recommend, you know, adding a protective edge loop to stuff. You can see these ones too, same kind of thing. These were done with the squares through here, like we did that valve to get that effect. More insert options through here, and just changing how you apply your creasing too. So these don't have creases on the edges. So you can see it's kind of giving that smooth effect. All those little, there's a bunch of insert mesh parts that I use at the time too, and this is just all created with the ZModeler brush. And you can get pretty advanced. But most of the stuff is all pretty simple, like if you think about how it's just created. So this was just a cylinder, and then I just kind of squished it down. I grabbed some of the edges and started pulling them out. And then when I got to a point here, I used that bridge connected polys, which is another fun one. Let me see if I can show you that, guys. Use all that quick. This one's another good one to use. So we did the bridge to holes. Bridge connected polys is fun too. And this one, if I come across a poly, locate the bridge, there's bridge connected. Now when you do this, you're gonna see this little line. This is gonna determine where you're gonna bridge the two polys. So this one's gonna bridge this one. And so if I click on this, I'm now able to do this functionality. And this is how I got those shapes added in. So I went bridge two polys off an edge. I made sure that I had a middle point. Then I came to that point, I split it. This one did something weird. Hold on. Let's do a little low topology there. You can split that middle point. If you ever need to weld stuff too, you can go to the modify topology area and click weld. And there's an option for triangle on this bridge connected poly too, triangle sides versus quad sides. That will determine how that middle point gets generated. And now this should split a little better. And so then I split this, and then there's an option for ringing it as well. So that will now make it circular. And then you can come in and punch this out or make it grow. And there you've got that kind of shape. So that's what was done with those other pieces. All right, so I got a few minutes here to look at these questions quick. Glad you guys are enjoying the streams. Yeah, I definitely, if you haven't played with the ZModeler brush and ZBrush, it's fun to play with. And there's a lot of things in here that if I go to, say, other applications, I miss. So like the Q-mesh action is definitely fun to go through and start extruding different points out, and having that welding ability is actually really, really nice. So there's been some changes, bug fixes for sure, since the release of R3, which is where the ZModeler brush was introduced. We're always looking for, adding stuff too, so new stuff is always on the way. All right, you guys, well, I think that's about the end of the time here. So once again, thank you guys and gals for coming out and watching the stream. So if you have any other questions or want to know about any of the options in the ZModeler brush, if you go to the ZClassroom page here, there is a whole slew of lessons for ZModeler. So the main one here is going to go over each individual one. So every option in ZModeler, so in the point option, in the edge option, in the curve option, in the face option, there's a video for each of those sections. So you can go in and you can watch them and see what they do. One more thing too with the ZModeler brush is, let's say if you have a mesh that's really dense and you only want to affect faces. So what you can do is in each of the actions, there's this option called do nothing, and do nothing will prevent that action from happening. So if I set my move to my point action to do nothing and my edge action to do nothing, now it's only going to do a Q mesh because that's the only one I have set to an action. So if I hover over an edge and click, it's going to perform a poly action instead of an edge action because I have that edge set to do nothing. So if you find yourself working on a mesh that's very, very dense and you go to select a poly to extrude it, but you're actually doing an edge loop every time, you can set the edge loop to do nothing and then it won't process that edge action again. And you can also, if you have a brush set up like that, maybe you find yourself that this happens a lot, you can just set up a ZModeler brush that has the Q mesh action only turned on and everything else set to do nothing. and then you can just save that out as a new ZModeler brush, and those settings will be remembered. So when you load that brush, it's only gonna have the Q mesh, and then everything else will be set to do nothing. So you can do that as well. One final thing, so the trial is out for ZBrush. If you have any friends or anybody that is looking to learn digital sculpting, we're doing developer streams probably to the end of the coronavirus, so every day one of us should be streaming. The trial version flows directly into this. You can download it for 30 days, you can try it out. ZBrush does not use your GPU, it is CPU based. So this means that you can probably run ZBrush on any computer you have. So Paul was using a really old MacBook for a long time. The MacBook I'm on right now isn't all that great, and you saw all the stuff I did in this stream. So you don't need a high-powered graphics card to run ZBrush, so you can try the trial out and see if you like it. We also have various ways to get into ZBrush. So we have subscription-based options and also perpetual licenses. We've never charged for an upgrade fee for our perpetual licenses. There's no yearly fees. So I bought ZBrush years ago and haven't ever paid for another license or update of ZBrush since then. So it was one of the greatest investments that I made even before joining Pixologic. We have monthly option plans as well, and try to open up more avenues for people to get in. We also have ZBrush Core. Solomon and Daisuke will be doing streams on ZBrush Core 2, and you can get into ZBrush Core as low as $10 a month. There's also perpetual licenses for that as well. So that is it for today. As you can see in the chat, we have somebody on a 10-year-old. This computer is actually 10 years old too, so it definitely works. So thank you all for showing up. Stay safe. Practice that social distancing. And if you do anything in the streams or anything at home using ZBrush, use the hashtag ZBrushAtHome. We'd love to see what you guys are doing. So take care, you all. And I think Daisuke will be going on Monday, and he'll be in Japan time. He's out of Japan. So he'll be doing that and showing some of the ZBrush Core stuff. All of these videos are also on replay too, so you can log into YouTube and rewatch these as well. And I think that's it. So thank you. Stay safe. Happy ZBrushing.